Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and the Texas Veterans Land Board. Check out vlb.texas.gov, put that into your browser, and see the many great benefits that come to veterans here in the great state of Texas. Again, vlb.texas.gov. Today, my guest is Sam Corum. He is a Marine Corps veteran, freelance photojournalist. His work can be seen in the New York Times, Getty Images, as well as the European Press Agency. Sam, thank you so much for being our guest today. I enjoyed so much our conversation on the phone last week and kind of hearing about your career trajectory after the military. Can you tell us a little bit about your military service?
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me. I really did enjoy our conversation as well last week, and it's a pleasure to meet you, at least face to face or FaceTime to FaceTime right now. Yeah, so in 2004, I enlisted in the Marine Corps as a combat photographer. I went to boot camp at Parris Island, 1st Battalion Alpha Company. So I got to listen to the graduations every week, which was a bit of a tease. And then I was stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, 2nd Marine Division with combat camera unit there. I deployed to Iraq 2 times. First time was in 2005 to 2006 in the Al-Qaim region. And then the second time was all of 2007 into 2008. With Regimental Combat Team 6.
So how did you get involved then with photography? What kind of lit your passion for photojournalism?
I'm one of those kind of textbook cases of where I took a class in high school, really kind of clicked with me, and I just kind of hit the ground running. It wasn't an immediate thing, and I almost only took 1 year of photography, but there's one moment where if that moment hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't have continued. That was towards the end of the first year. At that time, the school system had a week of finals, and if you didn't have a final, you had like a half day. But I had taken some pictures, and I was spending some time in the dark room printing pictures, because this was back when there was still film. And so we took film, developed our own film, and printed them in a dark room.
Huh?
Oh, I know. It feels really weird saying that, but yeah. And I took a printout to the teacher and asked him what he thought, because, we're still learning. And he said, "Oh, this is really good. You're taking photo too, right?" And I said, "No." He said, "Why not? You didn't give me an invite." And he said, "Well, let's go fix that." And we walked down to the guidance counselor's office, changed my schedule, and the rest is history.
So there was also a part of that story too where, well, before we get to that, I'm interested to know what the photos you were taking in high. Were you just taking still shots of things around your house and your community and the school? Or was there maybe like a specific subject or style that you enjoyed when you first started photography?
I took pictures of everything. Early on, I kind of gravitated away from people just because I would get a little nervous about being confronted. And I still do to this day. I get nervous about being confronted by people asking, "Are you taking my picture?" or that kind of stuff, because I don't like confrontation. But early on, there were certain things that kind of really struck me. It could be still lifes, graphical compositions, which is kind of carried on to worked itself into my style today, where I very much like graphical visual elements to include them into moments in my pictures. But I mean, it was back then.
Can
It
I
was
pause you real quick for those who don't have maybe a photography background? Can you explain a little bit more what the graphical images mean, or when you're looking through the lens, what are the things that you are seeing in the picture?
So yeah, sure. So graphical usually refers to um, compositional elements and patterns and things like that. It could be um, an interesting series of shadows cast on the ground, or a pattern of tile that you shoot in a different way, or if uh, say I'm shooting a bunch of Secret Service agents on the tarmac, placing them in very specific spots within the frame. So those positions kind of make an interesting graphical composition.
In the photojournalism 2 class that you were about to take, did you get to take that class? Because I know that there was some discussion right at the school about not being able to continue the photojournalism courses that you were taking.
Well, I mean, it wasn't just, it was photography as a whole. It wasn't, back then, it wasn't focused in photojournalism. Um, uh, and it was year two, and year two had something like 15 students in the class. It was a smaller class because it was invite only and more in depth. Um, but it was the third year, because that's the year that I really kind of hit the ground running with everything. And it was, but they didn't offer a third year, and I didn't want to stop. Um, so I sat down with my teacher, Randall Gornowich, who I'm still very good friends with to this day. Uh, and we tried to figure something out. And we realized that through the school system, they offered an AP course in studio art. Now, art is, or photography definitely does fall under art, for sure. But I always thought that that would just, an art class would just be, painting and drawing and things like that. But within the AP course, you were able to do a focus in a specific medium. And so we convinced the school to allow me to have a one-on-one class with my teacher, uh, doing AP studio art with a focus in photography. And so I was the only student that third year. First period, got to walk in and essentially do what I wanted. He allowed me to start to find my own style and visual voice. And then we put together a portfolio at the end, sent it off to the AP board, and I got a perfect 5 out of 5 on it. And that was actually the start of more AP studio art photography courses at the school once I left.
How instrumental was that class to you?
Very instrumental. He allowed me to experiment. For one example, darkroom enlargers, they're on a big base plate, and then they have a kind of a track that goes up with the projector on top. And you put the paper down here and the film up in here, and it projects down on with the light. But there's a limit into how high that can go. One thing he allowed me to do was, because I wanted to print bigger, he let me take apart the enlarger, flip it around on its base, so then it was hanging out over the floor, and I had to weigh down the back because it's top heavy. But then it essentially doubled the height of that the enlarger can go, so doubled the size, and I ended up projecting an image on the floor and then laying out pieces of paper on the floor, not just one big sheet. It created this really cool overlay. But I mean, he let me find my voice and experiment, or at least not find my voice, because I often feel like I'm still developing it, and just run with it. And if I had an idea, he said, yeah, go for it.
And I mean, that's just an incredible, to be able to find your passion, develop your passion, and to be able to have, somebody encourage you and allow you the space to grow. So, after you have this really great experience, you actually created the class, correct? And it's still ongoing at your high school?
I believe so. I mean, That was almost 20 years ago. So,
High school
uh,
doesn't feel that long ago, but I guess when
oh,
you say
no,
it like that, it's like, yeah, I
I
guess
know.
we're getting older.
Yeah, yeah, that was almost 20 years ago. And I know the school system has gone through a lot of evolutions and changed here. And because I still live in the same county that I went to school in. Actually, I live maybe 15 minutes from the house that I grew up in. My parents no longer live in the area, but I ended up coming back and staying. So I'm not sure um, if it's still going on, but I know for a fact it was that third year of photography continued at least through the time that I was in the Marines.
And you really have had kind of an incredible knack for creating opportunities for yourself and pursuing things when they're not always there. And after you got out of the military, you are actually looking to pursue a career in photography. You have some incredible photos on your website from what I believe was your military service. Our audience will be able to put the link in the body of the show here once it's posted online. But you have multiple deployments. You have I guess I would say a portfolio of images that you have created in combat zones. You've already kind of demonstrated, like I said, a knack for using your talent, finding the opportunity, and then blending and merging both of those to benefit your career, to benefit your personal and professional development. Explain to me kind of how you left the military and then found your way into a photojournalism career after leaving the Marine Corps.
Yeah, sure. So I love the Marine Corps, and I'm sure every veteran has experienced this. You know, the first 2 years when you're in your enlistment, you're like, man, this sucks. I'm getting out as soon as I can. And then it starts to shift in the third year. You're like, it's not so bad. And then you get to your final year and you've gotten some responsibilities. You're no longer at the bottom of the barrel. You're looking at the real world and you're going, oh man, it's an unknown out there. I know what I'm doing here. I've got the safety. Maybe I'll do it. But as much as I loved the Corps, I loved photography more. And I did not feel like I was done growing. So I decided that I was going to get out and go to college. And I went to the Corcoran College of Art and Design and got my BFA in photojournalism while there. Um, I, I intentionally picked an art school because rather than a more traditional college that had journalism courses at it, because at that time I knew I wanted to do photography, and I did not want. I felt like I was going to potentially waste time taking math courses or science courses, even though I love all of those things. I love geometry, I love sciences. But I really wanted to focus into photography, and journalism or at least photojournalism. A lot of people can do that, but what really sets some people aside from others is having a really refined visual style. And I wanted to go to art school to help kind of develop that visual style. And, you know,
Can I pause you real quick? I'm interested to know how big of an impact the other students who maybe had different aesthetics, different approach to art, whether they're, like you said, they're painters or they're sculptors or they're whatever it may be. There's a lot of different mediums all coming together within one campus. How did that kind of aid your development as a photographer?
well, it was fantastic. I mean, it was essentially a deep dive into art. While I said I didn't want to waste time with, math, sciences, and English and stuff like that when I knew I wanted to do photography, I still had to take other art courses. Even and at the school, we had about 10 to 15 students that were majoring in photojournalism, and we had a couple of pure photojournalism classes together. But then I had multiple fine art photography classes. I had to do some painting classes. I'm a horrible painter. I mean, even if I went to college and I took college level drawing and painting classes, and I still draw and paint like a kindergartner.
They're doing finger painting while everyone was doing advanced shading and all kinds of different techniques.
Oh, but it's art school, so you can be, oh, I did this abstract, you know.
That's how you turn it. I like that. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Make your weaknesses your strengths.
Yeah, but no, it was fantastic because we wouldn't just have critiques with other photographers. We often would have critiques with other classes, and critiques they could be very rough because as an artist, you often get very visually attached or very emotionally attached to the work you create. Or even as a photographer, when you take a picture and you present it, often you have attached all of these emotions and experiences that you had to when you were taking the picture. Like, I had to wait 30 minutes in the pouring rain, crawling through the mud to get this picture. And so in my mind, it has to be a good picture. And so it's got to be up there. But then you learn that the viewer doesn't care about that. They only care if it's a good picture. So often you get defensive when somebody's like, the picture sucks or it doesn't work. Maybe try this different. But hopefully you get over that and you learn that a good picture is a good picture, and you have to kind of take your personal experiences out of that. But then you see what other students are doing and you're like, I like that over there. Don't like that over there, but I like this other thing over here. Maybe I will take this over there and this over here, bring it together with another idea I had over here. And, oh, wow, I've come out with something new. And that kind of goes along with something Pablo Picasso once said. He said, good artists steal, or good artists copy, great artists steal. And what he means by that is great artists will often keep an open eye out to what's going on in the world around them, and they will take influences from other things. But rather than just do a carbon copy of it, they will take something that they see or experience, interpret it for themselves, and then put something else out.
You are one of the, I don't know if you, but maybe the only guest that we have had who identified not only a passion, but had the skill, married those two at a very young age, and is still doing what they wanted to do when they were in high school. And a lot of our guests, and including myself, the trajectory can be kind of up and down. It can feel all over the place. I, at one point, was a salesman at Gold's Gym selling gym memberships. I tried international relations at the University of Texas and failed my Arabic foreign language classes 3 times, extremely difficult for me. But you are rare in the fact that you found, like I said, something that you are still doing, almost 2 decades later. And I'm interested to know if at any point did you, while you were in college or maybe after you graduated, did you ever think about taking a different path, pursuing a different career, or ever get tired of photography?
Absolutely. And I want to be clear to everybody that it's really easy to often see somebody who has become successful at a career and think that their trajectory has just been up the whole time. And that's not true. Back in the day when I first started photography, I did not have talent. I maybe took a few good pictures here or there, but I was not very good. I mean, I look back at stuff I took 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and I look at that stuff and I'm still like, that's not that good. I could have done it better. Um, it, I think the key for me was I just kept at it. There's the um, philosophy that to become an expert at something, you have to dedicate 10,000 hours to it. And I think that's absolutely true. And I may have had a lot of success so far, but I've also had a lot more failure. It's kind of, I'm not spraying and praying when I take photos or the way I approach life. It's very targeted with what I do and the actions I take, but there's a lot of failure. For example, when I'm shooting a wedding or an event or something like that, or an assignment, a wedding, I just know this because it's almost the numbers of how many pictures I shoot are almost always consistent. For a wedding, I will shoot 3,000 to 5,000 pictures and only deliver 300 to 500. And that's because I see something, I try it. If it works, I don't just turn and walk away. I will be like, all right, maybe what if I try it from this angle? Or what if I hold for a moment and see if the events play out a little bit differently and another moment or action just develops. And I keep trying it. And sometimes, often, if I deliver, 300 to 500 out of 3,000 to 5,000, it often doesn't.
Well, it's an interesting concept, right? So I think for our audience, for what we do here, is that even if you're a professional and you're in your career, you still have to use what I would describe as the game. You're being in the game. You're either at the wedding, you're on the battlefield, or you're working at the White House. To some degree, you are still practicing in that moment, even though what you're doing is actually your career. And that's something that I don't think anybody should take for granted or forget. Regardless, it doesn't matter if you're a photographer, a broadcaster, or you work in marketing. You are still, I think the theme of what you're bringing out for your own personal growth as well as your professional growth is you actually still try new things, even though you're essentially in the game. You're still
100%.
learning while you are in the middle of it.
Always. I mean, it was pounded into all of our heads when we were in the service. Complacency kills.
Yeah.
And complacency can kill your career. The moment you become complacent and stagnant and lean back and put your feet up, you give somebody else the opportunity to sprint past you. And you should never do that. I don't know where I heard this, but something I think about is often when you're looking at people that different levels of a field or career or an art, you kind of notice something as they go up. They get to the people that are most confident in their field and like to express their expertise and give unsolicited advice and preach that they know best. They often don't. That's not the top. You get past that and you get up, and that's where you get to the masters. And the masters are the ones that are almost like the Zen masters, the karate senseis that are just sitting back. Don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea. And often masters will refuse to identify themselves as masters because they realize that they don't know everything. There's still always something to learn. There's new technologies coming out. There's new techniques.
Is there a photographer or a publication that you look up to?
Um,
And if you want to stew on that for a minute, I'll let you think about it for a little bit. And the reason that I bring that up is because, I'm somebody who as a kid, I loved Michael Jordan. So
yeah,
to me, I compare in whatever field it is, whether, like I said, it's engineering or broadcasting. I'm always interested to know who is the Michael Jordan in that field. Who is the person for you that you look up to, or even, like I said, a publication where you go, man, I need to make sure that I read that Sports Illustrated or that ESPN magazine, because what those athletes are doing, they're at the top of their game. I really need to watch and observe how they go about their craft and how they hone their craft. And I think it to some degree, it keeps you inspired as well, as you said, to watch people who are great at what they do, but they still have the humility to continue to learn and grow in their field. And I'm sure there's so many great photographers and publications out there that you look forward to seeing and reading for inspiration for your career.
yeah, it's funny that you bring up Michael Jordan, because if you've watched the recent documentary series that came out on him, you can see that he was a hard ass on himself and everybody around him. Uh, and sometimes that was to his own detriment and caused a lot of friction. But even when he was at the top of his game, he still pushed himself and those around him really hard. He kept practicing, kept trying to improve and learn new things. In the photography world, man, that's so hard. One reason I say I'm not a good writer, or I haven't gravitated toward writing in journalism, is the fact that I'm horrible with names. So I have all these pictures in my mind of right now of like, oh, I love this photographer over here. I love this photographer over here. And I'm just like
So
put on the spot. I'm like, I can't
yeah, no, that's interesting. No, so what sticks in your mind actually are the you can see in your head, you can see the images, even though the names don't come there. The images are something that click in your brain when you're thinking about things, or even when you're going about life. Those are the things that stay with you.
Correct. Yeah. Obviously, I'm a visual person. So visual things will click in my head a lot easier than um, written things. Numbers are, for me, are kind of closer to visual than words, and names and things like that. Uh,
Well,
everybody
we'll come
learns.
back. We'll come back to that, yeah, in the second part, because I'm sure it'll come up in the conversation. But you, after you graduated, that is such a tenuous spot for anyone. I think that there's a real, it's a dividing line, and it's a test, especially not just for veterans, but especially for young men and women in their early 20s who, I kind of equate it to, instead of, kind of walking up a hill or walking up the mountain, it kind of feels like you're like walking on a ladder from one mountain peak to the next, or from one hilltop to the next. And, the ladder's kind of shaky, and you're like trying to get through these classes, but you're not in the real world yet. You have a ton of passion, at least I did, but you might not have the experience, which can be kind of a confusing and difficult place at the beginning of your career. So how did you get to the place where you kind of walk across the ladder, you start your career? What did that look like for you?
I think while you're still in school, internships are key. Getting a little bit of real world experience where you're definitely allowed to make mistakes um, is really good, because not only are you getting the real world experience, but you're also networking and making connections. Um, for me, uh, networking was key, as well as taking some risks. After college, I graduated in 2012. Um, and then I had a period of where things were not that great for me. There were certain factors in my life that were kind of holding me back a little bit. But once those cleared up, Ferguson was the first major news story in the country to happen at that time. And I had been doing a little bit of weddings and commercial work and events and nonprofit work, not very much, if at all, if I really think about it, journalism work for like a year and a half out of college. But I saw Ferguson happen and all the protests start there. And I said to myself, you know what? I need to be there. I need to go.
And where were you in DC at this time?
Yeah. Yeah, I was in DC. Pretty much I've been in the DC area my entire life, except for the 2.5 years when I was in Minnesota, where I was born. So I moved here when I was 2.5. And then the 4 years in the Marine Corps. I've lived in this area. But I decided with Ferguson that I had to go. I made a few calls and sent a few emails, but by that time, a few days of the protesting had already happened. So all the major news outlets already had people there. And so most places said, we'll take a look at your stuff if you get something, but we've already got people there. And I had a couple of photographers, one in particular, who was like, maybe you should hold off this time, wait until the next event happens, jump on it right at the start, and then make it yours. And I was like, no, I'd be kicking myself if I didn't go. So I decided to jump in my car and drive out there on my own. And this was all fully on my own. I drove the 10 hours from DC to St. Louis overnight. And I started taking pictures. I had a couple of friends there that I linked up with, so I wasn't, flying blind. But I started taking pictures for a few days.
Can I pause you real quick? During that 10-hour drive in the middle of the night, going somewhere that you had never been before, but felt like you had to be there, doubt ever crossed your mind? Did you ever do a U-turn and start heading back home? Or were you confident to say, I'm going to just pound some Red Bulls or some Rip-Its, whatever they may be, and I'm going to go find the heart of the protest, and I'm going to start taking photos?
Yeah, I mean, of course there was doubt. I can sometimes have the worst voice of doubt in my own mind, but I never made a U-turn or anything like that, because I think it was such a significant step to say I was going to do that drive that I had to be 100% at the time. But I realized you've got to risk sometimes for things to happen. At the time, I could afford it a little bit. I mean, it definitely cost me some money, and I never really made it one for one back from my work there, but it led to other opportunities that made it 150% worth it. Yeah, because I was there, I ended up getting a call from a former classmate who I had a good relationship with. One of his friends was a writer with a Turkish news agency, and they put us in touch because they needed a photographer out there because their guy had gotten arrested a couple of nights prior, and he was like, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to deal with these arrests anymore. I'm going to go back to New York. And so they asked me to work for them for a couple of days. And I did a couple of days work for them. It ended up being coincidental that I actually had pictures of their photographer getting arrested, and I was able to sell those pictures to them. And that's the only money I made that whole trip. I think I spent a week there, and I mean, out of a week, I made $400.
And so the guy that you replaced, you actually had, before you had gotten hired, you're down there figuring it out in the middle of the protest, and you actually had photos of the guy that you were taking photographs of the guy that you were going to replace 48 hours later.
Yep. Yeah. It was funny, but I mean, it was a good thing I did because that saved his job. when he had become arrested, that was early on during the protest before it was kind of clear that, the police were cracking down on, or weren't treating the press any different than, protesters, and were often restricting the press and arresting them. And the pictures clearly, and the bosses were concerned that he essentially had asked for it. Like, he had agitated things, like gone where he shouldn't have gone, or things like that. But the pictures showed the situation, because it was a sequence of pictures where the police line is like off to this side going this way, and he's got his shoulder facing towards him, taking a picture. And it's super loud, and you can't really hear a thing. And while he's taking a picture, he doesn't realize that the police line had started to move forward. And so he's taking a picture, and he gets shoved in the shoulder, and just his reaction while taking pictures was just kind of reach out with his arm. And so, like, he's taking pictures, he gets shoved, and he kind of goes like that and puts a hand on an officer. And like, there's the delay of push, look. But at that point,
you had all of these photos.
Oh yeah. And at that point, 5 officers are piled on top of him, arresting him. And they didn't even charge him with anything. They held him for like 6 hours and then let him go. But because I had those pictures that showed that he was not at fault, that it saved his job.
How do you think your career would have changed if you had not gone down to Ferguson?
I honestly don't think I would have anywhere close to the career I have now, because when Ferguson finished and I went back to DC, the agency that I was working with, I just lucked out that their staff photographer in DC was moving back to Turkey permanently, and they liked my work enough that they asked me to stay on full time. And they didn't list that position anywhere. They were actually originally planning on sending somebody over from Turkey. So I would have had no clue that that job would have existed or would have been available if I hadn't taken the risk and taken the chance to go out to Ferguson. So yeah, I mean, it's luck. It's luck that all that stuff lined up, but that luck wouldn't have happened if I had stayed sitting on my couch watching everything unfold on my laptop or on TV. A lot of life is luck, a lot of life, as well as in photography. I mean, in photography, yeah, sometimes we do get really lucky of just capturing the moment, but with photography, you can't see the moment happen, then pick up your camera and take the picture. You have to be
at the ready.
You have to be at the ready, almost taking that picture even if the moment didn't happen. And that's a lot like life, where luck is a key for a lot of people's success, but the successful people are the ones that put themselves in a position where they can take advantage of that luck when it happens. Because if you're sitting on the couch waiting for luck to come to you, it's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. But if you're putting yourself out there, 1 out of 100 times something lucky is going to happen, but 99 other times it's not. But still, that 1 out of 100 moments can make or break your career.
So much of what the consumer sees, whether that's scrolling through a social media feed or seeing a photo in a newspaper or online, is the tip of the iceberg for what you do, how you run a freelance business. Tell us about the other aspects of being a great photographer, because it is more than just a lens. It is more than just a camera. It is a very holistic approach to running a business.
Yeah, it's a very almost all-encompassing mindset. Um, as you develop your skill as a photographer, you learn to look at the world in different ways of, walking down the street and seeing how the sun casts a shadow through the tree branches onto the ground and seeing how there's that interesting pattern, or looking at a doorway and seeing that, like, oh, that doorway is really nice, but if I wait and be patient and wait for somebody to walk through and catch them right as they are like dead center mid stride going through that doorway, oh, that's something extra special. And that, in photography, there's a term for that. It's called the decisive moment. And that was first coined by Henry Cartier-Bresson, who's one of the pioneers of photography. First person to use an SLR camera, which is what we think of today as a camera. Before then, they were all the bellows stuff with the hoods, or the twin lens things where you had to look down the top to shoot out. But he was able to pioneer that decisive moment. And so you stop and look at the world differently. But as a business too, it's difficult because I love what I do because I love taking pictures. And I wish I could be out there taking pictures 100% of the time. But I would say only 50% of my business is taking pictures. Because I have to, for every day of shooting, I have to do 1 or 2 days of administrative work on the back end. I have to network. I have to email editors and contacts constantly, like almost once a week. I've got to research new equipment. I've got to teach myself new techniques. I've got to maintain all of my business records and finances and expenses and mile tracking and keep track of where my money is going. And because I'm a one-person small business, self-employed, I've got to figure out how I can keep all of that stuff separate from my personal life expenses. And yeah, people will think, it's pays great money to photograph a wedding, but because they're only working for one day and they get paid thousands of dollars. And now, at minimum, just when it comes to editing, a good rule of thumb when I calculate how much time I need to dedicate towards something, for every 1 hour of pictures I take, there's about at least 2 hours of post-processing. And that's just editing the pictures. That's not, putting together the album or invoicing everybody or putting them online. But even then, cameras are not cheap. And with the higher end cameras, most people don't need them. I would say the average consumer only will use 75% of a camera's capabilities. But that extra 25% is only even used 5% of the time situations that you're going to be shooting pictures. But as a professional, I've got to spend that extra money for that extra 25% of capabilities for the 5% of times, because my job revolves on going into any situation and being able to come out with a usable picture. I can't guarantee it's going to be great, but I can always guarantee a client that I will get them something that they can use. And that will look better than a point and shoot or a iPhone shot. And the cameras are expensive. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can I ask you too about, did you feel any pressure or urgency from the time that you were taking photos by yourself in Ferguson, which is a self-directed type of event, versus now you are taking photos for the New York Times, for Getty Images, did your, even like you said, keeping the books, buying the best technology, the way that you run your business on a day-to-day, was it validating to work for, these very prestigious organizations, or do you also feel maybe a little bit of pressure, like, wow, I'm in the big leagues now, like this is, you've progressed, quickly because you have approached it the right way? Is it now more motivating for you because and we haven't even got to this about the time that you're in the Oval Office and when you're at the White House and taking pictures at Congress? I mean, you're in just these incredible seats of power at an incredible moment in American history. Do you feel pressure, or do you feel like you're right where you're supposed to be?
100% pressure. I mean, yeah, I do feel confident in being in those situations, but there's pressure. I mean, the industry is highly competitive. There are dozens of fantastic photographers and dozens of really good freelancers in Washington. And so I can't, sit back on my haunches and just, be like, I got the freelance assignments already. I can just lay back and they'll just come to me. It's freelance. There's no guarantee. I get signed day by day, and more often than not, I don't know I'm working one day until the night before. And sometimes I get an assignment an hour before it happens. And so that's one thing that is kind of mentally tough is, when the assignments are coming in, it's great, fantastic. But if I go a week with no assignments, I start to think, oh my God, did I screw up? Did I do something wrong? What did I do? What can I do better? Oh no, I'm screwed. And my girlfriend will be like, it's going to happen again. You've been a week or two since you've had an assignment. Maybe, don't worry, you're okay. You're still good. You're still
some preventative medicine for you. Huh?
Yeah. And, but no, and of course it's nerve wracking. I mean, half the time I'm standing on a step ladder at the White House, and God, I've had nightmares of being in the middle of a press conference at the White House and my ladder collapsing and me falling in the middle of everything. I mean, oh man, I think President Obama's last press conference in the press briefing room, it was so packed in there and so tight that a woman passed out. And this is a small room, and it's tiny. It looks big on TV because when they're doing the overall shots, it's a wide angle lens, so it looks big. It is not that big. And it was utterly complete packed, shoulder to shoulder. It would have been a horror scene if it was right now during the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, think of the worst New York subway during rush hour, and that's how packed it was. And this woman passes out, and she just falls to the ground standing up in the crowd. And we're all going on, and the president's speaking. He's talking, and then he sees it, and we're all trying to, this was maybe a few feet away from me, and I couldn't do anything to help because that was that packed. I couldn't get to them. But the president notices, and he goes, "What's going on over there?" And it's like, it's you guys interrupting me. And he's kind of like, he thinks people are like pushing and shoving or something like that. But then somebody says, no, somebody passed out. And then he's like, okay, let me get my medical team in here. And so they come in and carry her out. But God, man, if I'm in the Rose Garden or the West Wing and then my ladder collapses and
the president's going to be pointing you out in the middle of a press conference.
Oh my God, I'm terrified right now thinking about it. So yeah, it's not only do I have that, but then, God, I can't screw up this shot because this is a big news thing. They're going to use it. I got to make sure my cameras are working. I got to make sure I've got fresh batteries in there. I mean, there's been one or two times where I've been shooting a lot throughout the day and gets towards the end of one of the later events in the day, and I don't realize that one of my batteries is dying because I always shoot with two cameras, and a battery dies, and then I don't. I have to remind myself not to panic in that situation. So I'm luckily, this is one reason why I shoot with the exact same camera bodies, is I'm taking the battery out of one and putting it in the other and just swapping back and forth as I'm shooting, because it's easier to do that than swap the lenses back and forth. But, you know, in combat, everybody is afraid. But courage is being able to continue reacting in the face of that fear rather than freezing up. You know, courage is not feeling fear. Everybody feels fear. Everybody's terrified in combat. If you're not, then you might need to go see the wizard and get your mind checked out a little bit. But yeah, same. I mean, I know photographers in Washington that have been doing it for 30 years, and they still are nervous and work a room and work hard.
Can you tell us what the day-to-day like is, the routine of going to the White House, preparing, getting there, taking the photos?
Yeah.
And
Working
if I can interrupt you real quick, how long have you been taking photos on Capitol Hill and at the White House?
Since Ferguson. I can never really remember. It's hard in my mind. Was that October 2014 or 2013? But I think it was 2013. But since I came back from Ferguson, I have been working on in Washington on the Hill and at the White House. So that's been 6-7 years now, almost 8. Yeah. So my day can vary. You know, if I'm lucky, I get a couple of days notice that I have an assignment, you know, later in the week. But for example, if I'm at the White House, I will be in what's called, if I'm shooting for the New York Times, I'll be in what's called the press pool, which is the small pool of journalists that is traveling with the president and goes where he goes. And the key reason for that is that pool of journalists are always within the Secret Service security bubble. And the reason for that is if something happens and the Secret Service locks down tight, nobody's getting in. Even if they're credentialed journalists known by the White House, nobody's getting in. And so then we always have journalists there with the president in that bubble. I mean, a good example of that is 9/11, when President Bush was reading the story to the school children and the attacks happened. As soon as those attacks happened, Secret Service went into emergency mode where nobody else was allowed to come out unless they were like, you know, his staff or something like that. But journalists, if they didn't have a pool of journalists with the president already when that happened, we would not have had anybody with the president. We wouldn't have had those shots of him getting the whisper in his ear and continuing to read. We wouldn't have had journalists with him on Air Force One when it was the only plane in the air.
Is that the feeling that you have when you're at the White House and you're in the pool? Like, you know, you're inside the rope. I mean, this is the real deal. And I know we talked about pressure a little bit beforehand, but do you sense that even the awe of the moment?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, often I'm in the moment and concentrating on working. So I really try not to let that kind of be an added pressure on my mind. Distraction. Yeah. But every now and then it does kind of occur to me. I mean, I think the last time it really occurred to me was when I got to drive around Daytona, the racetrack, when when President Trump went to the Daytona 500. I was there with him. I was on the Air Force One, and there's a group of 4 photographers that always travel with him, and we had to pull straws to who got to be in the SUV that was right in front of the Beast, the limousine. So I didn't get that one, but in the van, we got to drive around the Daytona 500. I got to stand on the grass between pit row and the racetrack where they have, Daytona 500 painted on the grass. And these NASCAR cars are just zooming past me. They're so loud. But I mean, I'm sitting here going, oh shit, I'm on Daytona right now. And I have moments like that. But for the most part, it's like I have that moment and I'm like, oh, I got to work. I got to get the picture. But at the White House, we don't just get to wander around. So there are very controlled events where we get called into. And one skill that the military taught me that paid off dividends in covering politics and stuff in DC is hurry up and wait. Because there is a lot of hurry up and wait, especially at the White House. We could be sitting around for 8 hours, and within that 8 hours, we get 30 seconds, literally 30 seconds to get photographs of the president, and that's it. I mean, when there's these sprays where the president is meeting with somebody in the Oval Office or calls the media into the Oval Office, often we're huddled, we're gathered in a group outside the Oval Office. There's a press handler that says, okay, go. And we all go in there, and we've got agreements worked out with who goes where and stuff. So we're not pushing and shoving, because I mean, it's the Oval Office. You can't be pushing and shoving in the Oval Office.
They don't want you knocking lamps over and furniture.
Exactly. Yeah. But they'll literally be like, go. And we're all in there, and you hear the blah, 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 all the cameras firing, which you actually might not be able to hear soon because everybody's moving to mirrorless, which are silent. But 30 seconds, and then they start yelling, okay, press, okay, you're out. And they start kind of like just herding you out, and we're all, as we're walking out, trying to shoot pictures over our shoulder, because, again, you never know what you're going to get. We call those sometimes happy accidents.
I was going to say, did you end up getting a good photo like that one time where you got your camera facing backwards and you're walking out of the room trying to catch a photo of the president or whoever it may be?
Not the president. So this is a picture that went a lot of different places. And some friends of a friend of mine, and then also another user that just reached out to me on Instagram, sent me a copy of a Dutch newspaper with my picture on the cover. And it was this picture.
Wow. And that was a photo that you took walking away, and you have the camera kind of like,
oh, I'm running away. I'm literally like, that was from the recent Black Lives Matter protests out in front of the White House.
Yeah.
And this was this was the night before President Trump had the photo op in front of the church, but it was one of the nights where they were burning things. And you can, in the picture, I'll send you an actual digital copy. You can see some fires burning in the background. But they just started charging forward. I was maybe 20 feet ahead of away from them, but unannounced, they just started charging forward. And I just saw this officer go to push one protester, stop, turn his head towards me, lock his eyes onto me, and then just sprint at me full speed. And I'm going like, I'm going. And I'm turning, running. And as he's running at me, I just turned the camera and I just started firing the camera, and he still slammed into me. But that was one of those moments where, like, I got away and I go like, okay, I got to see if I got this. And I'm like, oh, yes,
I got it.
But this is another example.
It ends up on the other side of the world. That's incredible.
Yeah. And this is also a good example how a good image does not have to be technically perfect. Um, the focus is a little off on it. Like the camera had actually focused, you'll probably be able to see it better in the digital copy, focused on the officers behind the front, the one charging at me. So he's a little blurry. But if I had been following like, standard thinking of, oh, it's got to be focused and sharp or else it's trash, it's nothing. But sometimes the moment can be so much more powerful than any technical imperfection that it just does not matter. But yeah, we're sitting around doing nothing for 30 seconds of pictures sometimes. But then other days we're just go, 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 go. And you get to the end of the day and you're like, oh man, it's lunchtime. Oh, wait, no, it's dinner time. And it's done. Capitol Hill is very similar. We'll show up there. We have the hearings we have to go cover, or like a press conference or something. And we'll go cover those, and we have to edit the images. Often we'll have to edit images while an event is going on and sending them back. I haven't had to do this yet, but a lot of photographers for like the Associated Press, which are really time sensitive, they like to have stuff out. They will be sending pictures to their editors from their cameras. So a lot of the bigger cameras have Wi-Fi built in. And so as they're scrolling on their cameras, they can be like, boom, all right, send it. And it's getting sent off to an editor. Now it's usually not the highest quality and it hasn't really been edited that much or toned. But
it's instantaneous news,
it's
right?
instantaneous.
You're sending it right out to the entire world to see what's just taken place.
Yep. So it can be really, really fast paced. But for like a hearing or something, or when they were having the impeachment hearings or the confirmation hearings, I will often like spend the first 5 minutes getting like a couple of like I mentioned before, good pictures, usable pictures. They're not artistic, but they're like just the standard headshot of somebody talking that if nothing else happens, they can use that, somebody can use that picture. Or it could be non-political assignments not on the Hill or at the White House. They're a little bit easier because you show up, you make your contacts with the subject, you go spend your time with them and take the pictures. But then you have protests where you're showing up. Again, you have to be there when the major moments happen. You can't react to them afterward. So you have to be there sitting, waiting around, walking around for these major events to happen. And I mean, I've spent 16 hours at protests before where nothing happens for the first 10 hours, but it might have. And sometimes I've gotten calls morning of, when I was staffed with that Turkish agency, there was a hurricane that was hitting Florida, and all week leading up, I was emailing my editors to talk to them like, hey, you want me to go? Should I go? Should I get ready to go? And they're like, no, because they were tight on budgets and stuff. And they're like, no, you don't need to go. And I'm like, okay. Well, I got a call at 3:30 a.m. with the editor saying, you need to go to Miami. And this is 3:30 a.m. the morning the hurricane hit. I'm in DC. You need to get to Miami for the hurricane. Oh yeah, and they're closing the airport at 10 a.m.
So you got to make it down there with all of your equipment, maybe some flotation devices, and like a home beacon or something like that.
I had to pack all of my gear, pack clothes, book a flight, book a rental car, plan, get in an Uber, get down. Luckily, this is during Uber, and they always at least encouraged Uber rather than parking because a lot of the airport parking here is ridiculous. But I had to get on the road within an hour to get to the airport to catch a flight that got into Miami before the airport closed. And then in that amount of time, I get there and they're like, well, now the hurricane is starting to turn north and it's going to start skirting the coast. So I'm like, shit, okay. So I jump in my vehicle that I rented. Luckily, I was able to rent a Toyota 4Runner. Fantastic for hurricanes because it rides
You're up
high.
off the ground a little bit.
Yep. And I needed that. But downside, it gets horrible gas mileage. And I had to chase the hurricane from Miami to Jacksonville, Florida, 600 plus miles, with 99% of the gas stations in the state closed.
So by the end of it, were you having to push your vehicle to go catch the hurricane? You just put it in neutral and trying to push it up?
Well, I never had to push, but I mean, it got to points where I'm panicking, looking for a gas station. I've pulled off at exits, gone to different ones, and I'm just going nuts. I see a hill and I'm like, all right, I'm on the hill. I'm going to pop it on in neutral while I'm going down the hill to save some gas. And luckily I never ran out of gas. But after that, I told the editors, look, I am not going to cover a natural disaster last minute like that. You've got to give me days to prepare because it's dangerous if I don't. But last minute, I'll get calls last minute to go somewhere.
Do you find yourself ever tired or exhausted between covering hurricanes, protests, the high tension that there can be at Capitol Hill hearings or in the Oval Office? I mean, these are not low stress environments. It's not to demean other types of photography in any way, but it's a little bit different than taking a picture of a landscape or architecture.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm starting to see a similar thing play out in the journalism world now, similar to how we saw it play out in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars in regards to PTSD. Most veterans now know to take PTSD seriously, despite previous generations saying, suck it up, you can deal with it, don't talk about your feelings. I mean, my grandfather, my dad's father, was a prisoner of war in World War II, shot down over Italy, and he survived, but he never talked about it. And even when I sat down with him to do a little video interview before he passed to try and get him to talk about things, and this was after I had served too, so I was hoping that we could connect a little more. In that moment, and I could not even get him to talk about what I knew were the bad things that he experienced. He just kind of, at that time, refused to even talk about it then because I know he didn't want to think about it. But in journalism, especially in people that cover protests, unrest, conflict zones, the coronavirus in the hospitals, PTSD is real. People forget that. I've been called a vulture, been yelled at, told that I'm just taking advantage of other people's sorrows. And, I just, as a journalist, I try very hard not to become the story, to take away from the real story. And so I don't engage them. I don't try and argue, but
it's hard not to internalize all the, as you said, even if you're in a combat zone, like you've taken photos in war zones, and then now you're sometimes maybe in what people would describe as a political combat zone or a legislative combat zone, and it is still your emotions, your mindset is still extremely elevated. Which is much different than some other different professions, and you do internalize that, I would assume.
100%. I mean, for the vast majority of photojournalists do this job because we care. We care about making a difference. We care about telling people's story and shining a light on injustices going on, and that can range from everything from poverty to protests, to political things, or to job losses, economies. We do that because we're empathetic. And to be really good at the job, you have to be empathetic. You have to be able to connect with your subjects and feel the emotions, or at least recognize the emotions that they are feeling to do the job well. Coming out of, after I covered Charlottesville and the protests there, and I was one of the only photographers there during the torches the night before the main protests. And that's still, I still think about that today. And I will tell you, when I was covering the torches marching through Charlottesville, I was more terrified there than I was patrolling the streets of Fallujah, because there was something about the air. I was right in the middle of the fighting. If you watch the Vice piece and they focus on one of the bald guys that gets pepper sprayed in the face, literally I'm next to him when he gets pepper sprayed and I get pepper spray on me. And then the following day, I'm in the middle of the fighting in the streets. Like, actually, if you watch the Black Klansman, the movie, and they show news clips of Charlottesville at the end during the credits, there's like 4 shots you can see me in there. I'm in there, and I was, when the guy committed the terrorist act of driving the car into the crowd, I luckily was not there. The one time I was thankful that the company's computer systems sucked and were slow as hell, because it took forever for me to upload photos.
Yeah.
Yeah, but because that took forever, I wasn't right there when it happened, but I knew I would have been. But I had just finished, and I was 2 blocks away, and I start walking towards the crowd, and I just see people terrified in tears running away, and I turn the corner and I see it all. And you know, I'm getting a little choked up now thinking about it, but I see the pain and the confusion and the terror, and I kind of had to flip a switch, similar to what a lot of military probably are familiar with, of turning something off.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll say that, you know, the camera is sometimes a filter or a shield in front of my face, but I shot the pictures, but that doesn't mean I wasn't feeling it. I maybe just wasn't processing it at the time, because when I went to my car to send the pictures, I broke down. I cried.
Do you think that journalists, is this now becoming a conversation within photography or within journalists to be able to seek care for PTSD? We actually had a great conversation with Matt Paul. We've talked to who's the captain at Austin Travis County EMS. We've talked to the chief of the Austin Fire Department about this as well, and how critical it is for, at least I think, for veterans to share their willingness to go get help with PTSD. Do you think that's something that you will be able to convey to journalists and the people that you've worked with about, hey, there's no stigma here. You need to go pursue a healthy way to live after you have been, you know, experienced and been in the middle of some of these really dramatic and at times catastrophic events?
So, I mean, I would say within the industry, it's pretty well recognized that this happens. And at least amongst my colleagues, we all are aware of it, and we will pull each other aside and ask, are you all right? I mean, one of my really good friends, he's from New Zealand. He's a big, boisterous, bodybuilding, I used to say broy until I went to New Zealand, and it was like, no, actually, that's just what everybody's like. But he's hilarious, with a fantastic accent, and he can do a wonderful impersonation of Chuck Grassley, which is amazing. But he was. I laugh now, and that's part of how I deal with things. Is I often will laugh. He was right next to the car when it drove right past him, like when it hit, and I saw him, and it was just shocking. He didn't have to say a word. I saw his face, and I stopped shooting, and I pulled him aside and said, "Are you okay?" And I think what the problems that we are running into in the industry is somewhat compensation when it comes to that, but I think that's just an overarching problem in the industry of compensation not growing with inflation and things like that. I mean, we're getting day rates now that were the same as the 90s. But a lot of companies really do take care of their journalists and freelancers. I mean, New York Times has been fantastic to me during the pandemic. They've sent me, PPE. When I started feeling sick, they put me on paid quarantine for 2 weeks as a freelancer. And all I did was say, like, I'm feeling a little funky today. I'm going to call the doctor. It was early on. I couldn't get a test.
Sure.
But I think the biggest thing we have to face or get is the public's perception that journalists are unfeeling and they're there to be vultures and take advantage of other people's emotions. I mean, there have been journalists that have committed suicide. I don't know if you know, but do you remember the picture from the 90s of that vulture stalking the starving African child?
I don't know if I've seen that one.
It's like there's a vulture in the lower left corner, top left corner is a child that is emaciated, just bent over, and it looks like the vulture is stalking him. Well, that photographer is a South African photographer, and he was in a group of photographers that became known as the Bang Bang Club in South Africa. They covered the end of apartheid and all of the unrest there, and they got the name because gunshots would start firing and they'd all be running towards it. But he committed suicide, and he got a lot of heat for that picture, asking why he didn't do anything to help, or did he do anything to help? And a lot of things in his life and his experience haunted him, and he ended up taking his own life. And then we have colleagues that die, Tim Hetherington, Chris Hondros, are two of the most recent conflict photographers that I can recall that have died. Wonderful people, and they've been killed while taking pictures. But combating the public perception of we have feelings too. We empathize with everybody, with our subjects. We feel their sadness, and we have to look at the pictures long after those events happen. Like, it's part of the job.
They stay with you.
Those pictures.
Yeah.
And we can't just put them aside.
Sam, before we close it out here, I just want to thank you. I think you brought to light, I think the struggles that veterans go through, as I said just a few minutes ago, with PTSD or with anxiety or with depression after going through combat situations. I think you have, such a great role to play to be able to encourage the men and women in your industry to seek out professional help after experiencing very, very difficult and very traumatic experiences. So I appreciate you, bringing that to light and saying, hey, this is what's happening within our industry, and I think we need to keep addressing it. And that's one of the reasons that, frankly, I love the show, because it just, again, it demonstrates that veterans across every single industry are not only, one, are they great at what they do, but they're also trying to provide and use the lessons that they've learned during the military and after the military to help out their peers. Before we go, I wanted to give you the last word. Was there any other lessons learned or words of advice that you would like to leave our audience with today that we didn't get to yet?
I think, like I mentioned before, if you want to succeed, don't become complacent. Don't sit on the couch waiting for something to come to you, because it won't. It won't. You have to work hard. You have to put yourself in a position to take advantage of luck when it happens. But just because something lucky happens doesn't mean that it's going to work out. But you're going to fail. Everybody fails. And we often forget about that now in the day of an age of social media, where we go to Facebook and Instagram, and we only see the good. We see these friends going on wonderful trips, but we don't see the diarrhea they got. We see these people posting these great jobs that they're getting, but we don't hear about the 100 other jobs that they applied for or didn't get. Nobody succeeds 100% of the time. But if you want to succeed, you also have to fail.
Sam, before we close it out, can you give us your Instagram and website handle so that we can check out some of your photography? I know our producer and our editor, Keith, does such a great job, and he'll be able to overlay some of the photos we've had here to illustrate our conversation. And you do really take some great photographs. So where can we find all of your work? Sure.
Yeah. My Instagram is at the Corum, at Charlie Hotel Echo. No, sorry. It's at
a little rusty, huh?
At the Charlie Oscar Romeo Uniform Mike. That's going to be my photojournalism page. I have a second page. It is Mountain Man Photography, or Mountain Man Photo. That's where I do a lot of my outdoor, non-political stuff, rock climbing, and I post pictures of doing that. And that's MTN Man Photo on Instagram. My website is just samuelcorum.com. And on Twitter, I'm at Corum Photo.
Well, we'll leave it there, Sam. I appreciate you sharing us some really incredible lessons over what is just an amazing career and experience that you've had since back in high school. And I appreciate you sharing your lessons and your insights about really just your nose for finding where the story is going to be, and just continuing to be, such a great steward and example of all of your talents within your industry. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and the Texas Veterans Land Board, thank you once again for joining us here at Next Gen Warrior. If you are a friend, a relative, know someone within the veterans community, we would love for you to share and promote our content as we here continue to promote the success stories of veterans after they leave the military. Thank you once again for being in our audience. We will see you next Monday.
Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior podcast.